Okay. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of convos.dev where we talk about tech and life and everything in between. So for these episodes, we are bringing in an article that we've both read throughout the time that we last recorded. And today, Chris is going to talk about something that he's read, and we're going to discuss it.
Yeah, I have two versions of this article because I've seen some writing around this in a couple different ways. So the first article is very aggressive. The other one is more mournful, I suppose, or accusatory. The first article is called "If You Let AI Do Your Writing, I Will Come to Your House and Kill You." Now, I did prep you. It was aggressive. So I'll send that to you here. And then the other article is by one of my coworkers, Christina, who I've mentioned before in the podcast.
Mhm.
And hers is my allies that failed me in the fight against AI. But they're both about AI in
Oh,
writing.
okay.
And so I will send you both of these just so that you have access to them. But that's the topic at hand. And it's essentially that, like, depending on your area of interest, like AI slop means one thing or another, depending on whether or not you care that much about that particular discipline. So I'll probably mostly focus on Christina's because I think hers is a little bit more succinct and like easier to understand the argument. The other guy's just kind of upset. But he also wrote for the New York Times another piece, so like he's done a lot of writing on it as well. So that's kind of the topic at hand.
Okay, so give me a summary
So
of the
Christina, yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Yeah, I'll give you the summary of Christina, which is essentially that a lot of designers in particular are very particular about not letting AI encroach upon their space, while at the same time being very happy to let AI do all of their writing or most of their writing, so much so that it has massive obvious tells. And her concern is like, hey, I'm concerned about writing, and the process of writing is so crucial and important. And you may be concerned about your own discipline and be very sensitive to AI there. How can we basically work together? And she doesn't really have a final conclusion. It's more of like an observation. But I have some thoughts in the conclusion zone as well. But that's her essential point is like, you need to be sensitive in areas that aren't your expertise on how AI slop comes across to people when it is their expertise. And I can give you some examples as we go, but that's the core argument.
Okay, say more.
Okay. So it basically came from her attending a design conference, and she shows up, and there was a talk that was all about not doing AI slop in design. And she noticed like the guy was reading off of a teleprompter, and the entire talk was like, it's not X, it's Y, and like this kind of stuff, and M dash is all over the screen, and this kind of stuff. A lot of kind of arguments that you'll see AI writing do. And she was like, I feel like offended. Here you are talking about AI slop and design, and it's so obvious that like you let AI write your entire speech, and it feels like hypocritical. It couldn't grab my attention. Like it wasn't a cogent, thought out argument. It was basically just one point. Don't let AI do slop in your design. But it was clear that AI did a lot of slop in his thinking in the presentation of it. And so that was kind of where she started. And then they gave like a really nice designed physical book to you at this conference. So she was like, "Oh, this is going to be so cool, like a cool coffee table book." And she opened it up, same thing. Every page was clearly super AI written. It was beautiful,
Yeah.
but every single piece of text in there was completely written by AI. And so she's like, these designers were like supposed to be my allies in the fight against slop, but they only care about it when it seems to affect their domain. And why are they so active in producing slop in my domain, which is writing in particular? So
Yeah.
that's kind of how she starts and the experience that caused her to say, like, okay, I need to write about this. And then her question basically for the rest of the article is, how do we actually work together to help each other in areas that aren't our expertise? Or what does it look like to be sensitive to a different area? Does it mean that I never use AI, or does it mean I use it in a different way? Or so she kind of talks through some options there that we can talk through next, but that's where it starts.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I'm curious about your thoughts on using, I know you are a deep thinker and writer. So I think we've talked in the past on our podcast about how you feel about AI and writing, but maybe reiterate for the audience and then maybe your outlook has changed over the weeks.
Yeah, I think it's changed slightly. Generally speaking, I feel like good writing is the product of good thinking, and the product isn't as important as the process. You as a
Yeah.
person and also the quality that comes out is kind of forced through the sieve of good thinking to get out a proper result of the writing. But I think where it's changed, and this is some of my answer to, I think, Christina's point or question that she ends the whole article with, which is how do we work together? I think I've gotten to the point where I'm realizing like you need to have gradations in the way you think about this. So just like with code, there are some things where like for me at least still, I want to hand code some stuff, mostly new APIs, things I want to learn. I want to actually play with it and say like, I need to understand how these things fit together. What about this? Let me try this. Let me try that. And sometimes I'll use AI within that, but I'm still pretty hands-on. Then there's like this middle zone where I mostly prompt and then refine by hand. And then there's the others, kind of the far zone where I prompt, and if I want to change something, I prompt again. And I've found that those balances between those three, they're not quadrants, zones or whatever, they've changed over time. Like I've become much more comfortable prompting and prompting to change, and doing much less handwriting, but I'm still finding very much so I need all three zones. And I feel the same about writing. So for instance, I have a skill for like change logs we do where it will go and scrape all of our GitHub history around a certain topic, look at all the SDKs in
Hmm.
particular, gives me bullet points, and tries to capture a lot of the style of my writing. But I want to actually write the post still. I find it super important for me because I'm wanting to read it as a dev and think through like this is not the way I would attack this argument. At first we have to talk about this and that, and like there's just too much context to bring to an AI currently where I don't feel like it can produce the kind of quality it needs to. And then out of that, I'm usually doing a video. So I want to think through it so that I actually have done the thinking before I sit down to record. And a lot of that thinking means writing. So
Yeah.
all that to say, like I think I found ways for AI to augment my writing, but for a lot of writing, most of my writing, I'm still the one actually putting pen to paper. The only time that's not the case is for like documentation for my own personal side projects or stuff that I'm wanting AI to write, like skills. I'm not in there writing my own skill files. Like, AI can handle that. So a lot of it depends on the consumer, but if the consumer is a human, I usually want to write it. If the thing requires me thinking deeply, I also want to write it. So I still have all three quadrants, I think, in the writing sphere. And they've changed over time, but I'm still probably the opposite I am with coding, where I'm doing most handwriting
Yeah.
with a little bit of augmented and very little that I'm just prompting my way to a written piece. I would only do that basically if AI is the recipient of that written piece as well.
I really like that. I like how you separate it out into quadrants because I think I do the same thing. So that's actually really interesting because I've never thought about it in that way before. Like I have, I think four quadrants or four
Okay.
like methods, which is you're just fully having AI write a first draft of your blog for you, which to be fair, I often actually do a lot for work because I am very often running like research projects, like
Hmm.
evaluating because I work at Brain Trust, which does like evals and observability. So a lot of the time I'm running like these research projects. So for example, I recently evaled the Figma MCP server versus the Paper MCP server,
Yeah, that
and
was such a cool
it
read.
was it was a multi-day research project, and the one thing that AI was super useful for, which is what I do, is I keep a log called like analysis summary or something that just keeps a running tab of everything I've tried because I'm often going down different routes and kind of trying different hypotheses, and over time it becomes really difficult to remember what I've done, and over time I've also don't really want to care about option A, option B, option C. I just care about the learning overall that I've gotten from trying out some of these things. I don't want to uh, like inundate the blog with every single thing I've tried because then it just becomes too heavy.
Yeah.
So a lot of the time I will do quadrant A, I guess, which is like having AI take a stab at the first draft because it can remember kind of more things than I can. Then there's like quadrant two, which I don't like, which is like once you read it, you kind of prompt it with, oh, like make this more educational or something
Yeah.
like that. Or like with an overarching direction, like I don't like that because it's not specific enough. I do like quadrant three, which is like what I'll do is I will go through and read the whole thing. And as I'm reading, I will kind of do angle bracket tags or whatever and just literally leave like inline comments and be like, this sentence can we explain more about why we got this number? Or if we're talking about like standard deviation or p-value or things like that, I will assume that the reader doesn't know what some of these like mathematical things mean. So I'll always add a sentence that explains what that means. Or things like that. Like I will go through and be very specific. Or if it's making a claim about like this being better than that, I'll be like, can you pull something from the logs and give a very specific example? Or like add a note that I need a screenshot here of X, Y, Z or something like that. So I'll go through and I'll be very, very specific about every single thing I want to do. And I'll say to AI, I'll be like, change only the things in these angle brackets and nothing else. Because I like everything else. So that's like quadrant
Yep.
three, which is like it's very specific copywriting edits. And then four is like me writing myself. Um, and so I like to do a combo of one and three, and then four when I kind of get to that point where it's like I need that human touch. And I usually do four at the end when I'm pretty happy with the structure of the content, but now I just want the writing to be like good.
Yeah.
um, and that's how I've done my flow so far. And I actually really like it. It helps. I feel like I really am thinking because I'm doing
Yeah.
all the research behind the blog and I understand everything that's happening. But I'm using AI to remember everything that I've done and kind of compile it into themes for me. And if I really don't like the structure, then I will also rework the structure. But it feels like a very collaborative process between me and AI. But I do use AI a lot and I will admit to
Yeah.
that. So, yeah.
I think that my only caveat to that, because I think we're similar in that sense, and like I, it is like you don't stay in one quadrant, the whole time. Same thing with coding. Like you don't only ever stay in one quadrant, but
Yeah.
generally I'm finding that projects fall into one bucket or the other quadrant or whatever.
Yeah.
I don't typically have it right the first draft because for me, most of the good writing or speaking is knowing what not to say. And for
Yeah.
that, I have to really think through like what needs to be here and like what doesn't. And a lot of times the scope, when I start with what AI has, I only start with the scope and then I might trim from the scope. But I never think of like, oh, actually, we took out a lot of stuff that needs to be here
Uh-huh.
conceptually to understand what's going on. Like I don't typically add to the scope naturally.
Yeah.
And I think the same thing happens with code. If I'm like, hey, give me five options, what I'm doing is once I get those five options, I'm choosing between five options. Really
Yeah.
what I want to do is say like, what are all the possibilities? And I want to say, no, 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 yes, yes, or yes. Let's look at just these three. Now you tell me which one of these three you think is most helpful. Like I
Mm.
want to actually do some of the curation ahead of time. Now, I think what changes is that a lot of the curation for you is the research you're doing. So
Yeah.
you're kind of giving it the starting point. Whereas a lot of the writing I'm doing, I'm coming at something fresh and I'm not giving it a starting point of my own research. So I think there's a way in which like we're still doing something analogous to each other. But I do find that like thinking through it in those different stages or whatever really helps you, to your point, to think through the problem, to think through what you're trying to communicate. And like the slog of finding like what's the right metaphor here or the right wording or the right whatever is not for every piece. You're right. I think I've mentioned this before, but I took a speed reading course in college, and I think this has been the other analogy that's helped me by this former nun who was like 85 years old, who was 5 foot nothing and like looked very unintimidating as a person. But the moment you sat down, you realized just how intellectual and smart she was. And her very first thing was basically like, you need to find that there are different levels of reading. And if you try to read everything at speed reading level, you will destroy your reading. And if you try to read everything at slow textbook level, you'll destroy your reading. And so the first thing to ask is where does this fit? And I think
Yeah.
there's something in that with writing as well, or coding, or any of these disciplines, art as well. Like, where does this fit? And if you try to always shove everything into one zone, and you become so like monochromatic in that way, that it kind of destroys both sides. You miss the real benefit of AI, and you also miss the real benefit of thinking. And so I think for me, writing, I would tend to a lot of my deep think pieces be much more on the slow, I'm going to hand do this because of the benefits. Like the process is the point. Whereas a lot of other things where the process isn't really the point, it just needs to be a product that gets out there that defines what to do, etc. Like it would be foolish for me to say, no, I'm handwriting everything, even
Mhm.
this thing that I'm never going to read and that nobody else is going to read and it's for AI. Like that's a foolish thing to do. And so I'm trying to find ways to think in that way when it comes to using AI in all these different disciplines. instead of being so monochromatic in my thinking and like yes or no, in or out, binary. It just doesn't really work in a complex world.
I love the speed reading analogy. And I did not know that you did that. I don't think you've mentioned that.
Yeah. Oh, I
Um,
haven't. Okay, yeah.
I just haven't listened. But, um,
I don't know. I repeat things too many times. I can't remember who I told them to.
but I really like that. And I think to add to that, I think it's also understanding where your brain is at a certain time and how to
Hmm.
funnel where your brain is at into. So, sorry, let me back up. So like I have ADHD. And so sometimes I feel really scattered. And I don't know how to explain this best, but sometimes I will lean into the scatteredness. So if I were to lean into the scatteredness in this example, let's say I just don't feel like focusing or I don't feel like I can focus. That's okay. What I'll do is maybe I will start to talk out loud to like whatever transcription service exists,
Right.
and assume that later on I can compile those thoughts or AI can help me compile those thoughts. But there's also times where when I feel scattered, I really try to focus on one thing. That's why sports is so great for me because it really helps me focus on one thing for like 1 or 2 hours. But if I feel like I really want to focus on something, I'll force myself to just write stream of consciousness into a notes app.
Hmm.
Um, and I think like so essentially there's two approaches. There's one where I do use AI to help me compile a bunch of scattered thoughts, and there's another where I do force myself to hand write things from scratch and actually form complete sentences, which is like so weird to say like as a that's a thing that is hard to do, but now I think a lot of people don't do that, and I do have to force myself to like actually write essentially. But it's hard because I think the activation energy is having to phrase things, and we're all perfectionists, so it's hard to like read something and be like, this sucks, this sounds bad, so let me just like oh, you'd rather use AI because you're used to reading a first draft that's much better phrased now. Um, and I have to get comfortable with like being like, no, I'm just gonna write stream of consciousness, but there's gonna be a lot of magic in those words because they're really just my phrasing of things.
Hmm.
But it's kind of I'm okay with both approaches actually. It just kind of depends on where my brain's at a specific time of day, and what I feel like doing in terms of energy and mental energy. Um, yeah.
That, that's an interesting take because that's basically where Christina goes, like in her
Okay.
question and how she answers it. Because she finishes the article by saying, like, when we don't feel competent in an area, we can often resort to using tools that like produce something plausible but soulless. Like I saw a couple tweets around this too. One guy was like, "Today's the day," or like, "Now is the time to get an English major because the way things are going in like 3 months, you're going to be like scribe to the king because nobody will know how to write cursive." Or, like it was that kind of thing. I saw another one about AI music, and they were saying like, "It's so interesting that people have so firmly rejected AI music so quickly." And somebody responded saying something like, "That's because the music is the point. Like producing it is the point. We don't just want something that sounds good. Like if you're a musician." It's actually playing it and like interacting with it from who you are. That's the whole point of the thing. It's not the
Yeah.
product, it's the process. And so she said, like, how do we fix this? And so she said, what if the answer is being comfortable at being bad at things? And I think there is something there. And that is kind of what you're saying. Like, there's a point with writing or whatever the discipline is where you're like, I have to kind of be willing to say, this first take isn't good, and that's okay. And I'm going to start here. I don't think that's the only way to write, to your point. Like you can start, I think, with the quicker pacing, but there's so much in any discipline where you have to kind of get into a flow state where you really take your time, you grind through what seems like a never-ending slog, and when you come out the other side, it looks simple like a
Yeah.
logo design. You see these huge posts of like all the things they went through, and you're like, dude, like I could have done this at the like, yeah, it's a simple logo, but like the process that got them there is immense. And with a really well written piece, you should read the piece and say, like, that's such a simple argument. Like that's so clear and clean. But the slog it takes to get to that is
Mhm.
so much of the process and it develops you as a person. I think about like another analogy of automation. Like I like to automate stuff. I know you do too. Like there was always kind of this joke before AI, like, oh, I'm going to spend like 20 hours automating a thing that takes me 10 seconds. But like the answer to that was always, well, yeah, but I'm going to use it 20,000 times. So in the end, like it's fine. And I think there's something to do when it comes to AI and whatever discipline you are writing in this case, where yeah, it may take you 3 or 4 times longer, but the effect it has on you as a person and on your
Yeah.
thinking and the way you process things has long lasting ramifications that you really can't put a number on. And so
Yeah.
I think there are ways in which making yourself do it is like an automation for you. Like it changes you so
I
much so
love
that in
that.
the end, it like, yeah, it transforms you and it makes you a different person.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I've always been the type of person who has to experience something for myself to learn a lesson. You know, like when your parents tell you, like, I don't know, uh,
Way too
I
many
don't know, or
examples come to
I
my
don't know,
mind.
like what is it? Like, don't don't date horrible men or something like that.
Right.
And then girls go and they like go and date like a
I'm the
bad boy.
exception. For me, it'll be fine. Yeah.
Yeah, or something, but then they have to learn the lesson and you have to go through the like humans make the same mistakes over and over again as they're growing up because
Yeah.
unfortunately even because somebody tells you something doesn't mean that you understand it as a person and it's like a very fundamental philosophical thing but yeah it's like kind of the same idea where you kind of have to do the work to understand it as a person even if you might know it in your mind you don't know it in
Yeah.
like your heart or your soul so
It's not your
uh,
impulse. It's not your
yeah,
instinct. Yeah.
yeah. Wow,
She gives a
we
couple.
always get so philosophical.
We got real deep. There are a couple other answers that she gives as possibilities. So I'll just mention these briefly. One was like, what if the answer is being bad and just being
Yeah.
okay with that? What if the answer is working together? Like I do writing and you do design. Like find a collaboration with somebody. What if one of the answers is acquiring skills? Like you actually just learn to do the thing, even though it takes you a really long time.
Hmm.
Um, she ends. She ends with this picture of good-handedness, which is a phrase that I've talked about with her before. So I'm going to read a little bit of an extended section here, if that's okay. She says, there's a feeling that writer Mark Slutsky calls good-handedness. It's the immediate feeling on reading the first lines of a book or starting a movie that you're in good hands. I want my design friends to feel good-handedness and hospitality when they visit a website I made. And I want to feel like I'm in good hands when I'm with the guests in the designer's world, even when I'm wearing the wrong shoes. The best
Hmm.
hospitality isn't always the house that looks like it's straight out of a magazine. Sometimes it's your friend inviting you over for a movie night. They had a long week at work, their apartment's a mess, and they thought they had popcorn, but they must have run out. And so they have to run to the store. You sit down. Nothing's perfect, but those are the nights that you remember the most. It's all deeply human, and you're in the best of hands. And maybe that's what we need, the humility to have a messy home, to take a crack at writing that article, even when it doesn't turn out to be any good, to be assisted by AI rather than replaced by it, to refuse to outsource our thinking, even when the thinking is hard and slow and there are no right answers. So I just felt like it was a really well done
Wow.
conclusion. She's such a good writer. So speaking of good
Snaps.
writing,
Snaps for Christina. Oh my God. That
so
was
good, right?
beautiful. Oh my
Yeah.
God. Um, okay, so you mentioned the other article. Is there anything that you want to bring up from the more aggressive one?
I don't think so in particular. I think he's a little bit more like direct. I think there's actually a better article that I'll try to send you as well that he did for the New York Times that I'm not seeing for some reason right now. But he's basically just complaining about what he's seeing, why it's like people outsourcing their thinking, how people aren't really carefully thinking through logic anymore. And he gives a bunch of examples. It's quite long, and it's not nearly as inviting. But I'll link it so that people can look at it as well. It's much more direct. So maybe if you're a writer and you're angry, this is a great one to read. If you say, I want to learn and think through this, I feel like Christina's holds a hand out and says, like, let's figure this out together instead of just beats people up.
Yeah, we're here to give you options at convos.dev.
That's right.
Okay, well, thank you everyone for listening to our discussion on using AI in writing and going down a more philosophical rabbit hole with us, as we like to do. And as always, if you have any feedback or questions, you can go on our website, hit us up on socials, Twitter, comments of this video, anything. And thank you, Chris, for hopping on this podcast with me.
Thanks.
See ya.